Anyan Haseo.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
He called Trump mentally deranged and a dotard, meaning a senile old person. Kim said the US president had insulted him and the regime and pledged to take the highest level of hardline countermeasures.
With the renewed interest in North Korea and potential lead up to military action due to the bellicose nature of its current leader, Kim Jong-un, and President Trump, it is of particular note that there is not enough background or history in the English language online and in print about Korea, that is. A basic overview is a good start to understanding the dynamics of the Hermit Kingdom. Paektu Mountain, with its long and rich history for the peninsula, is the best place to begin. This mountain was claimed in the mid-20th century as the birthplace of not only the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il, but also the entire North Korean movement, which they believe would give legitimacy to the new regime. The foundation myth for what is now North Korea, the DPRK, and South Korea begins over 4,300 years ago at Paektu Mountain. The founding date for what is considered the first Korean kingdom is 2333 BCE. This earliest of Korean countries, now known as Gojoseon, which is old or ancient Joseon, so it wouldn't be confused with the later Joseon Kingdom, is considered to have been a confederated kingdom consisting of walled city-states based geographically around the Yalu and Taedong river basins, the Liangdong Peninsula, west reaching into Manchuria, north into Liaoning Province and Puyu, south into the Korean Peninsula beyond Pyongyang, and east extending past Paektu Mountain. For centuries, Gojoseon controlled a large territory in Northeast Asia and had been mentioned in Chinese literature as far back as the 8th century BCE. Gojoseon's foundation myth in the Samgak Yusa, written during the 13th century Goryeo period, putting it simply, a bunch of mythological beings descend to Paektu Mountain. A tiger and a bear prayed to be human. The tiger screwed up, but the bear got it right and became a woman who prayed for a child, and one of the mythological beings impregnated her so that she would give birth to Dangum Wangum, who became the founder of Gojoseon. Dangun ascended to the throne and, although this location has been disputed, set up the seat of his empire near Pyongyang. So it's very important now to consider that North Korea considers its present capital and its modern foundation to be located in the very same locations found in legend, making a several thousand-year connection and continuity with the past. A lowly social and economic status for most of the population in current North Korea mirrors much of Korea's past kingdoms and empires. For much of the history of the Korean peninsula, a large percent of the population was either slaves or lowly born peasants tied to the land with no hope of achievement in life for themselves or future generations. Throughout Korean history, punishment for falling out of favor with the current regime or being on the wrong side in a coup or attempted overthrow may end you and many generations of future family members in a low position. This was then, as it is today in North Korea, a tactical matter. You'd do better crushing opposition to your rule by condemning a lineage for many generations, thus removing a viable threat well into the future. Landless and powerless clans will not easily become an obstacle to their rule. Today, North Korea has political prison camps where people are born in captivity and will serve their sentences until they die in these glorified work, or shall we call them death camps. Due to pressure from China and other neighboring kingdoms between the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, Gojoseon was on the decline. It had its brief last gasp as Joseon, and even that by the 1st century BCE disintegrated, but would begin the era of the Three Kingdoms. To keep this video under many hours long, I am leaving out many details from this period. The fact that there is much dispute about exactly which territories existed, when and where, with the added dilemma of a poor written history of the era intact, mainly relying on reliable and for political reasons then and now, often doubtful records by the Chinese. Although there are many contradictory accounts of the fall of Gojoseon and the rise of its successor kingdom Puyu, the one thing that is considered to be accurate is that the Three Kingdoms considered themselves as the successor of Puyu, a kingdom that ceased to exist after its ultimate fall to Goguryeo, one of the three kingdoms, late in the 5th century CE. All of the three kingdoms have their own foundation myths, which are compelling and strange, like princes being hatched from royal eggs. But the three kingdoms, Goguryeo in the north, with Baekje and Shilla in the southwest and southeast respectively, are said to have been established during the 1st century BCE. Often overlooked when discussing the period of the three kingdoms is the small Kaya confederacy nestled in between Baekje and Shilla. Because of its geography and often its dominance over the other two kingdoms, Goguryeo was the obvious successor to the Gojoseon Puyo legacy. During the 700 years of its existence, Goguryeo at its height reached deep into the Korean Peninsula as far as the Han River and well into Manchuria. It was a Northeast Asian powerhouse. During the 3rd and 4th century CE reign of Gwanggato the Great, Goguryeo reached its golden age, reaching far into western Manchuria. For centuries, the Chinese refused to acknowledge that such a lesser state could control vast territories within its own borders. As many Korean kingdoms were considered vassal or dominated by Chinese suzerainty, were forced to admit as much with the discovery of the massive Gwanggato stela within the borders of present-day China. The carved inscriptions on the giant stone stela boasted the great accomplishments of Gwanggato. However, through purposeful mistranslation by the Japanese in the late 19th century, would give justification for the annexation of Korea in the early 20th century. And I have to take a moment to apologize for any mispronunciations. I'm not an expert on Romanized Korean names and words. The era of the three kingdoms would end late in the 7th century, mainly due to the weakening of Goguryeo through decades of war with the Sui and Tang dynasties of China, respectively, but more importantly because of the alliance between Tang and Shilla to force the other two Korean kingdoms to fail. This began the era of unified Shilla, who failed to unite the entire peninsula, which would last until early in the 10th century. With the fall of Goguryeo in the north and the immediate revival of their successor, the newly minted Parhe had by some accounts occupied an even greater territory than Goguryeo did. However, since the ruling class of this new kingdom had little in common with the diverse and far-flung inhabitants, Parhe lasted only a few centuries and fell around the same time as unified Shilla, and was unable to transmit its culture and traditions into the future. To be sure, this Shilla-Parhe configuration was the first north-south split of the Korean peoples and peninsulas, slightly mirrored in the form it is today. After the fall of unified Shilla, we entered the later Three Kingdoms era, which lasted approximately 1/2 of a century, or 50 years. Goryeo, now the successor of Goguryeo, led by the monk Gunye, emerged as a single dynasty on the peninsula, at once allowing refugees from Parhe to re-enter and gaining back some territory in the north lost at the start of unified Shilla. It must be noted that it was the efforts of Wang Gung who, through tactical warfare and diplomacy, brought the era of the later Three Kingdoms to an end and became the first emperor of this new dynasty. Goryeo lasted 500 years, but through endless problems in the royal court, domination of the court by one military leader after another, as virtual dictatorships, and finally decades of invasions from the Mongols, Goryeo was weakened so much so that it was overthrown by the Yi clan in the late 14th century. Although many think that Goryeo sowed the seeds of its own demise, they were renowned for their unique Seldon pottery, which was highly treasured outside the peninsula. They were also using movable metal type for printing 2 centuries before Gutenberg did. After the overthrow by Yi Sung-yi in the year 1392, the Kingdom of Great Joseon existed nearly 5 centuries, with it eventually being known as the Korean Empire in the late 19th century. Initially, there were attempts at reform at all levels of government, and to some success. Polls of the inhabitants of the Joseon dynasty showed that a very small percent had power and control over the majority of resources. Prospects for basic freedoms and upward mobility were about as dismal as they had been previously in the other Korean kingdoms, with the difference of public exams which could allow some to advance into government service and hope to climb a ladder of success. Also, the famous King Sejong single-handedly invented Hangul, the writing alphabet used by Koreans. Previous to this, Koreans used versions of Chinese characters and symbols that were not a good fit for their own language. During this time, more territory to the north was recovered, but it was also during this period that the peninsula suffered a disastrous invasion by the Japanese. It was the 1590s that Toyotomi Hideyoshi invaded Joseon, from the east, with the ultimate goal of the conquest of Ming China. The ultimate defeat by the Korean resistance led in part by the bravery and ingenuity of Yi Sun-shin, with his innovation of the kabuksin or fearsome turtle ships, widely considered to be one of history's greatest naval admirals, forced the Japanese to end their mission and return to Japan. At the dawn of the 20th century, we enter modern history, and much more is known regarding the history of most places, Korea being one of them. The destructive and humiliating Japanese occupation that lasted 35 years until the end of World War II leads us to the direct causes of the current state of affairs on the split Korean peninsula. After the Japanese were expelled from Korea, the ultimate fate of the freed people of Korea would rest on the hands of the world's superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. For geopolitical reasons, the country was split once again into a north-south configuration, communists ruling the north and brutal military dictatorships in the south. By the 1990s, South Korea would finally rid itself of their military rule, but there remains the dire split between a common people by an arbitrary political border. Currently in North Korea, or the DPRK, the people there have survived the brutal rule of three successive Kim family members, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and currently Kim Jong-un, who, like many leaders from the distant past, believe that their divine authority allows them to rule. Unlike leaders in civilized Western countries, Kim Jong-un, the current leader, has no apparent accountability for his actions and therefore is dangerous. North Korea has a massive military and could, on a whim, deal a destructive blow to the city of Seoul, with a population of 10 million people, is literally in close striking distance from the north. Kim Jong-un, like his father and grandfather, have kept their country so reclusive that they have been renamed the Hermit Kingdom. Maybe a strong leader in the West is needed to finally end the evil Kim family reign over the people in the North, but I don't believe picking a fight on Twitter is the best option. The ultimate goal for people in the world should be liberation for the suffering North Koreans and reunion with their brothers and sisters in the South. I mention again that many details in this video were simplified and many more were left out for brevity. Some versions of Korean history are infused with my opinion. Please feel free to add to the narrative or correct me in the comments below. 안녕히 계세요.